Hello, I'm Jair Espinosa, and this is Meta. The following is the first in a three-part series on better education. I want to be DepEd Secretary someday. Education is my passion, and it is my dream to make a meaningful impact on the Philippine education system. That's my goal, and I know this high, but I'm determined to achieve it. But that's someday. Meanwhile, I do this. There has been a lot of talk lately about improving the education system in the Philippines. Much of it is motivated by yet another dismal showing by our students in the PISA 2022. What we're doing is not working. I think we can all agree on that. So far, this administration's Department of Education has come out with three major responses to the current educational crisis. One is removing posters and other decorations from classrooms as they supposedly distract from learning. Two is updating the K-10 curriculum to the Matatag curriculum. And three is the implementation of Catch-up Fridays. In addition to this, EDCOM 2 was convened last year to discuss and analyze the problems and possible solutions to our education crisis. They released their Year 1 report last December. The report acknowledges right at the start that past responses to the complex and deeply rooted problems of education suffered from piecemeal reforms. The report writes, "It is time for something more drastic, to retool the entire education system because decades of earnest but incremental reforms still fell short." And then it proceeds to recommend more incremental and piecemeal reforms. And while I appreciate the attention it gives to external factors affecting education, such as poverty and the brief mentions concerning state funding on education, the recommendations as a whole suffer from a complete lack of creativity and imagination, such that the same recommendations could have been made 50 years ago. I agree that there should be a drastic retooling of the entire education system. It's just we seem to have a difference of opinion on what the term drastic retooling means. For example, the EDCOM report still talks about acquiring textbooks, and while that's not bad per se, in the age of the internet, textbooks, while useful, are not essential. It would be far more efficient to take the money for acquiring them and use it to ensure, for example, that every school has a strong internet connection, or just as good, build libraries that contain more than just textbooks. With how badly the Philippines has performed in international assessments, not just recently, but in the history of our participation in such assessments, just tweaking things is not enough. It has to be radically different. We can't just do things better, we have to do better things. That kind of change cannot be achieved easily, indeed, not in 6 years. It may take more than a decade, but if we really want to change things, if we really mean it, it will be worth it. There are certainly changes that the government will have to make in the system, primarily in state funding and in teacher education and selection. But more than that, changes have to be made in the classroom itself. These changes don't rely on funding and legislation. They only require the determination of teachers and administrators to do better things for their students. It starts with challenging the assumptions we have regarding what good education looks like. Children are doing poorly in school not because of any problem they have, but problems with how we have designed school. Indeed, we should start by assuming that everything we're doing now is wrong. Nothing is working. Starting from scratch gives us the opportunity to rebuild from the ground up a new set of beliefs, values, and practices for our education system. It is meaningless to simply do things better if the things we're doing are already obsolete. The Philippines needs more than just reform. We need a revolution. Now, the fundamental problem plaguing our schools today is that our students do not enjoy school. There is no love for learning. Given a choice, Children would rather not attend school, and frankly, they're not wrong. There are many things wrong with the way we have designed school, as educators John Holt, Alfie Kohn, and Ken Robinson explain here, decades apart from each other.
In fact, most schools are not at all prepared to help kids feel good. Quite the contrary. There is such an emphasis on rigor and raising the bar and higher standards that we end up with a lot of kids who are alternately bored and anxious because the education really isn't about helping them to feel like proficient thinkers who love learning. Instead, they have to memorize facts and practice skills in order to do well on tests. And that ends up being quite unengaging.
If you can light the spark of curiosity in a child, they will learn without any further assistance very often. Children are natural learners. It's a real achievement to put that particular ability out or to stifle it. Curiosity is the kind of engine of achievement, but teaching is a creative profession. Teaching properly conceived is not a delivery system. You know, you're not there just to pass on received information. Great teachers do that. But what great teachers also do is mentor, stimulate, provoke, engage. You see, in the end, education is about learning. If there's no learning going on, there's no education going on. And people can spend an awful lot of time discussing education without ever discussing learning. The whole point of education is to get people to learn.
There's a big difference, isn't it, between learning and education, and there's a paradox here as well, which is that kids love to learn, but they don't all like being educated. For a lot of them, the problems start when they go to school. When I say kids love to learn, if you think of it, children are really extraordinary learning organisms. I mean, think what they do in the first couple of years of life. They learn to speak, for example, which is the most fantastic accomplishment. And nobody teaches them how to do it. You simply couldn't teach your child to speak. It's far too complicated. Now, it doesn't work that way at all. Kids absorb language through their skin, and they may absorb several languages. I'm sure in some of your systems, you know many examples of kids who speak 4 or 5 languages maybe because they were brought up with them. So kids have a tremendous appetite to learn. The problems seem to develop when we send them to school, and I'm not speaking critically of individual schools or teachers at all, but there's something in the rhythms of education, something in the systems that we've created that eventually start to wear away at kids' curiosity, they wear away at their motivation and their appetite for learning. And so you find that by the time they leave elementary school, certainly by the time they're in secondary school, many kids are disengaged, bored by what's happening, and they far too often suffer from stress and end up leaving the system entirely.
What I contend and assert is that babies come into the world extraordinarily curious, eager to learn, extraordinarily resourceful and competent at learning, that they are, in the most literal sense of the word, scientists. They do exactly what scientists do. They use the scientific method in making sense of the world around them. And then they get to a certain age, which may be as young as 3, but in any case the age of school, and this process is turned off by adults who think they are now going to direct and control the learning of these children, who they treat them like empty receptacles into which they are going to pour whatever learning they think they ought to have. The child's curiosity, the child's independence, the child's confidence in herself as a learner, as an explorer, is undermined, eroded, and destroyed. And after only may take a couple of years, you get these bored, apathetic, I don't know, the kinds of kids you see in schools. And it was at that time that I wrote in my journal and in the book How Children Fail, that school is a place where children learn to be stupid. And the process that makes them stupid, at least stupid in school, is other people trying to control their learning.
So school is a place where children learn to be stupid. Yes, the heavily controlled nature of school makes it boring and unstimulating to children. In most schools, you just sit in a desk all day listening to someone standing and talking in front while you try to remember as much as you can for when they give you things to do, to see if you remember enough things so you don't fall behind your peers and begin to feel stupid. That's boring, even to an adult. Occasionally, There may be deviations from this routine. There are games, there are movies or plays, there are special talks, there are fairs, there are clubs. But most days, it's the dull routine of the classroom where students are taught merely to conform and comply. Hence, the one thing that is missing that could inject some joy back in our classrooms is freedom. But to practice freedom in our schools means to challenge things we have assumed for decades in education that drive the way we teach in our classrooms. Assumptions like every child needs to know a little bit of everything by a certain age, or we can teach every student the same things in the same way and they will learn at the same pace, or teachers need to teach or else students will not learn, and students need to be tested regularly to prove they have learned. So, the short version of everything I will argue is this. If the old ways of teaching are standardized and coercive, the new ways must be individualized and student-driven. Learning in the classroom must be less about acquiring information and more about creating knowledge. It must be less controlled by the teacher and give more freedom to students. That kind of change will affect everything, our curriculum, our pedagogy, our assessments. So let's talk about each of those. By the way, before I go on, I should emphasize that these ideas are not mine. They've been around for decades, from John Holt in the 1960s to John Gatto in the 90s to Alfie Kohn and Ken Robinson and many others more recently. Their ideas are being implemented right now in many schools to great success. So we know these ideas work. It just takes real desire and dedication to get the ball rolling on these changes. So let's talk about curriculum. We don't have time to discuss the long history of how schools came to be as we know them to be now, but suffice it to say, everything was designed to cater to the demands of the Industrial Revolution hundreds of years ago. A lot has changed in the world since then, but not in our classrooms. In terms of the curriculum we use, everything was decided by a group of 10 men called the Committee of 10 about 100 years ago, who determined what children needed to learn and when. They decided that there should be 12 years of formal schooling, that math, language, and history should be taught at every level, physics and chemistry were to be taught at the higher levels, and that these subjects were to be taught to every student in the same way with the same scopes, regardless of the student's future in college or their career. We still follow their prescriptions to this day pretty much to the letter without so much as a question as to whether it still works today. So let's go ahead and ask that question. Is that idea of a prescribed curriculum still relevant in the context of the 21st century? In the early 20th century, it made sense since there were still very few sources of information, and the only way to get information was to get it from the experts themselves. The old curriculum is based on the assembly line model of education, in which it was believed knowledge could be assembled part by part, level by level, from the basic to the complex, until you form the finished product, the educated child, at the end of the process. Its premise is the idea that all children need to know the same things by a certain age. This raises another question. What do students actually need to know? This year, the Department of Education is replacing the old K-10 curriculum with the Matatag curriculum, which promises to, quote, make the curriculum relevant to produce job-ready, active, and responsible citizens, take steps to accelerate the delivery of basic education services and provision facilities, take good care of learners by promoting learner well-being, inclusiveness learning, and positive learning environment, and give support for teachers to teach better. No, seriously, that's what Matatag stands for. It's meant to address the overload of subjects and lessons that students go through, but still institutes a standardized coverage for all. Now, what I do commend the Matatag curriculum for is reducing the number of subjects in the lower grade levels to just language, literacy, math, and makabansa. If teachers can find ways to implement this in a student-driven way, and the curriculum designers further reduce the prescribed topics to focus more on skills, then you may have something there. So it is important to note that not everything we currently teach in school is essential. Not everything that is essential to everyone, and just because something may become essential in the future does not make it essential to learn now. So how do we know what is essential? In the age of the internet and smartphones, what is essential? I would argue there are really only three main essential skills: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then one essential subject that we're seeing, especially now, that's history. Everything else is open for debate. The DepEd needs to start moving away from a heavy topics-based curriculum to a more skills-based curriculum. In a prescribed curriculum, the large majority of it is not learned or is eventually forgotten. This is because students can tell that much of it is not essential. What happens then is we are spending a lot of time in school on things that in the age of information are no longer essential to know by heart, because it is possible to find them out when they are needed. Education reformer John Hope gave a simple answer to the question, how do we decide what children need to learn? His answer was, let them decide. He wrote that if it is essential in the world, they will find it and learn it out there. The time to learn something is when you need it. No one can know what he will need to learn in the future. Much of the knowledge we will need 20 years from now may not even exist today. See, exactly. The knowledge our children will need in their lives by the time they graduate from college may not even exist yet, so how can we possibly know what to teach? John Holt wrote those words over 50 years ago, and they're even more relevant today. Now, we've talked about democratic education on this channel before. Those schools operate under assumptions that children know best what they need to know, and they're very successful at it. Changing the curriculum has to mean more than just rearranging and redistributing the topics. It's about control. When information was not readily available, it made sense for schools to cram as much information as possible just in case some of it would be needed someday. Now that information is everywhere, we can give students the freedom to take control of picking and choosing what is interesting or relevant to them. After all, people only really learn what matters to them personally. Now, I know that sounds like a scary thing to many teachers and parents. You might ask, what if they don't want to learn algebra? What if they don't want to learn history? What if they just want to dance or play games? Well, that is where having a good teacher comes in. Expert teachers can make learning skills and topics relevant and interesting so that students will want to learn them. Expert teachers can motivate and engage students' learning so that students will learn on their own. That's why any effective education system needs to be run by expert teachers. Now, let's talk about the picks. Standardized curricula doesn't just determine what is to be learned, it also determines when you have to learn them. Curriculum designers line up topics in a neat and logical order while working under the assumption that at certain ages you must have already learned certain things so that you are ready to learn the next thing. Real, authentic learning, however, is messy. You learn things, then you forget them, then you learn them again. Just when you think you're getting it, you stumble on something else. Learning is often faltering, a cycle of failures followed by small successes. There is no neat sequence to learning things. You jump around topics. You advance a bit, then you go back, then you skip some topics. You get bored, move on to different topics, then you go back again when you need to. Sometimes you never go back at all. The time to learn something is when you need it and when you're interested in it. The idea that we can put a strict schedule on learning is a remnant from the old factory model of education. An individualized curriculum addresses the fundamentally simple fact that not all students learn the same things at the same pace or even in the same way. In the current system, students who cannot keep pace are penalized with poor grades or worse, being held back, which has a negative effect on students' motivation and on the ways they view themselves. Students need the freedom to learn what they want to learn in the ways that will be effective for them personally in the time they need to learn it. So, we could do wonders to our education system by simply changing the dialogue from this is what you need to learn to what would you like to learn. In that system, there's an imperative on teachers to convince students their lessons are interesting and relevant or they will be ignored. This will be hard for some teachers to hear, but not every student needs a deep understanding of algebra. Not every student needs to know physics or chemistry. But if you can show them that learning those things are important and interesting, then the students themselves will pursue that learning. Now, one possible side effect if we let students follow their interests is they may eventually discover their passion. And once someone has found their passion, learning is not just inevitable, it's unstoppable. The DepEd has always touted that grade 12 graduates should be ready to start working. Well, I can tell you, workplaces are not looking for graduates who can tell the difference between an ionic bond and a covalent bond, or can graph a parabola, or knows what iambic pentameter is. They want skilled, independent workers who are creative, passionate, and capable of working collaboratively and thinking critically. So these changes cannot be instituted quickly. Expert teachers are essential, and that should be the very first thing the government addresses. As Ken Robinson says, an education system is only as good as its teachers. However, I think small steps can be done in this direction. Perhaps instead of catch-up Fridays, there could be free-for-all Fridays, where students can choose to learn anything they want to learn about, attend the classes they want to attend, do what they want to do. Let those who want to learn math, learn math. Those who want to read can read. Those who want to watch documentaries can do so. Those who want to dance can dance. And yes, those who want to play can play. And then we can take that a step further by simply modifying what we're already doing with our senior high school system and taking a cue from the Singapore school system and allow students to specialize their studies earlier than grade 11. Say, for example, at grade 9, we could start allowing students to pick between STEM studies, art studies, sports studies, and vocational studies. Schools can also choose to specialize in one of those areas of study so that they can put more focus in that particular field. If students want to pursue theater, painting, or sports, let them. If they want to prepare for courses in engineering, research, medicine, and law, let them. If students want to learn cooking, auto mechanics, carpentry, agriculture, let them. That's how you develop the next generation of great national leaders, the scientists, artists, athletes, chefs, entrepreneurs, public servants. Let students pursue their interests and passions. We cannot reinstate joy and excitement in learning until we move away from the coercive nature of standardized curricula to greater individual freedom.